Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Should be a fascinating one today.
Today, we're going deep into the world of female psychopathic killers, talking about the crimes and the women behind them.
Right. He's going to try to unpack some of those myths we have about these women and their crimes.
Really makes you think when you hear psychopathic killer, what image pops into your head?
Yeah.
Probably not a woman, right?
Right, exactly. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do those beliefs, those societal myths we have, how do they affect how we view women who commit these horrific acts?
Yeah, because it's kind of hard to reconcile that image of, the fairer sex with someone capable of taking a life.
Right. And it's not that those beliefs, those myths are completely false.
Right.
It's that they're incomplete.
Okay, so you're saying it's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. Think about it like Mother Earth.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
She's nurturing, life-giving, but she's also capable of incredible destruction.
Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes.
Exactly. We tend to forget about that destructive potential when it comes to women.
Especially when it comes to violence.
Exactly.
It's much easier to see them as the victims, not the perpetrators.
And that's a perception that's deeply rooted in our history. Think about Freud. He believed that aggression was primarily a male instinct. Mm-hmm. And then you have Darwin's theories, which, while groundbreaking, also really solidified these traditional gender roles.
Right. So a woman who was openly aggressive was seen as almost an anomaly.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And these ideas, they don't just stay in textbooks. They affect our culture, our legal systems, even how mental health professionals diagnose personality disorders.
It's remarkable how deeply ingrained some of these biases can be. Yeah. There's actually this one detail from the research we did that really struck me as a great example. It's about Hervey Cleckley's book, The Mask of Sanity, which was really a groundbreaking work on psychopathy.
Right, right.
Early editions of this book didn't even mention female psychopathy. It wasn't addressed until the 1976 edition.
Wow.
It really makes you wonder how many other examples of this are out there.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's almost as if female psychopathy was invisible, right? Hidden in plain sight because it didn't fit the narrative.
Right.
But psychopathy doesn't discriminate based on gender.
And neither does violence?
Exactly. And that's why we're here, to delve into these uncomfortable truths, challenge those outdated myths, and to really understand the realities of female psychopathy.
Because if those ingrained biases can lead to something as significant as a whole facet of a personality disorder being completely omitted from a seminal work, imagine the implications. So to truly understand these women, understand the crimes, I think we need to start with a clear definition. What is psychopathy?
It's not an illness. It's actually a personality disorder.
Okay.
Characterized by a lack of empathy, remorse, tendency toward manipulation, deceit, and often a predisposition toward what we call instrumental violence.
So we're talking cold, calculated acts, not just like a crime of passion.
Exactly.
But if these traits can be present in both men and women, why do we hear so much more about male psychopaths?
It's a huge factor. Those stereotypes, those preconceived notions that we talked about.
Yeah.
For decades, the idea of a female psychopath was almost a contradiction in terms.
Right.
And that really had a chilling effect on everything from, research funding to diagnoses to how these cases were even investigated and prosecuted.
Earlier, you mentioned instrumental violence, and I wanted to circle back to that. Can you elaborate a little bit on what that is and what makes it different from other types of violence?
Yeah, so think of instrumental violence as violence with a purpose.
Okay.
It's deliberate, it's planned, calculated, it's often lacking that kind of emotional heat of a crime of passion,
Right.
It's more like a psychopath might decide to harm someone simply because they see that person as an obstacle to a goal. Not necessarily because of any feeling of anger or hatred, it's just that person is in the way.
That's a chilling thought. It actually reminds me of a quote from the research we did. There was a statement from a female serial killer named Sherman Coughlin, and she said, "All I knew was that I was going to do this thing, and there wasn't anybody going to stop me."
Wow.
Sends shivers down my spine.
And that really encapsulates that chilling mindset.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a complete lack of empathy, a lack of remorse. They see their actions simply as a means to an end. But the motives behind those actions, those can be as varied as the women themselves.
So it's not always violence for the sake of violence. There's like an underlying purpose, a calculated goal that's driving these actions.
Exactly.
So then what are some of those motives? What drives these women to commit these horrific acts?
Well, one recurring theme that we see, and I think this is very interesting, is that it's often about concealing another crime,
Okay.
particularly fraud.
Really? So it's murder as a way to cover up financial schemes?
Exactly. A really good example of that is the case of Nancy Siegel.
Okay.
She drained her elderly partner's bank accounts, created this elaborate web of lies. And when he was found dead, stuffed in a footlocker, she claimed that he was alive and well, living with another woman.
Wow. Just incredible how easily someone could compartmentalize something like that.
It is. And then, on a larger scale, you have the case of Sante and Kenny Kimes, the mother-son duo.
Oh, yeah, the grifters.
They were involved in everything from identity theft to murder. And what I think is so striking in that case is Sante Kimes' just utter lack of remorse. According to her son's testimony, before he went to kill someone, she just casually told him, "Good luck, do a good job." And when he was done, he bought her flowers.
Wow.
Like it was, a reason to celebrate.
It's just chilling how they viewed other people as just pawns in their game.
Exactly.
Which, thinking about these kill teams, we tend to think of serial killers especially as lone wolves, but that's not always the case.
Right. And a really good example of that is the case of Helen Golay and Olga Rotterschmidt.
The Black Widows.
The Black Widows. Yeah. Two women in their 70s who systematically preyed on homeless men in Hollywood.
And they took out life insurance policies on these men before they killed them.
The level of premeditation is just staggering.
Yeah.
And if you go back and listen to those recordings of Golay and Rotterschmidt arguing after their arrest, it's bone-chilling stuff. At one point, Golay even says, "I am evil. You have no idea how evil I am."
It's scary, too, because I feel like the general societal expectations of older women, that grandmotherly stereotype, would maybe lead people to be less suspicious, even when the evidence is right there in front of you.
Right, exactly.
Which, kind of on that disturbing note, it brings us to another category of crime that I think is particularly difficult to talk about but impossible to ignore. Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
It's insidious, really.
Yeah.
It's a form of abuse. The caregiver, usually the mother, they'll either fabricate or induce illness in a child for attention and sympathy.
So they want to be seen as, like, the heroic caregiver.
Exactly, even at the cost of the child's well-being.
Wow. It's hard to imagine a worse perversion of that maternal instinct.
It really is. And tragically, it's not as rare as you might think. I mean, there was a study from the Journal of Pediatrics where researchers actually secretly filmed parents suspected of Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Oh, wow.
And they actually caught them on camera suffocating their children, all to keep up this facade of a desperately ill child.
Oh, it's just horrifying. It really makes you question everything.
It does. It shatters those myths, those comforting myths about motherhood.
Right.
And that those instincts are always good and pure. And you see this manipulation of societal perceptions in other types of crime, too.
What?
Like Cesarean section homicide. These are women who will murder pregnant women to steal their babies.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I was just thinking about that, the Lisa Montgomery case. She befriended a woman online who was pregnant, strangled her, performed a crude C-section to take her baby. It seems unfathomable.
It really does. And what's even more disturbing is, like, the level of premeditation in these cases. Montgomery researched C-sections online, ordered a birthing kit. It's like she had this whole fantasy constructed in her head.
Right, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that fantasy a reality.
Exactly.
Which kind of leads to another question. If these women are so manipulative, so good at hiding their true nature, how do they convince juries, convince the world that they aren't capable of these crimes?
Well, it goes back to that idea of impression management.
Mm-hmm.
Psychopaths are masters at controlling how other people see them.
Mm.
They can be charming, they can be charismatic.
Right.
And they're very good at exploiting those expectations, those myths, to their advantage.
So it's almost like they're playing a role.
Exactly. They're putting on a performance.
Oh.
We see it time and time again, Think about Diane Downs, who shot her own children. She shows up for her trial pregnant.
Oh, gosh.
Playing right into that image of the nurturing mother.
Wow.
Even though, the evidence suggested otherwise.
Yeah.
And then there's Carla Homolka.
Right, with Paul Bernardo.
Right. She managed to convince authorities that she was the victim, that he was the abuser.
And she studied up on battered woman syndrome.
She did.
Wow.
Learned the terminology to make her story more convincing.
Wow. It's scary how effectively these myths, these societal expectations, can be weaponized.
Yeah, it's like the courtroom becomes a stage.
Right.
And these women, they're playing the part.
So after unpacking all of this, what have we learned today? What's the takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is just the importance of awareness. you know?
Okay.
We can't ignore the reality of female violence, especially when it's driven by something like psychopathy.
Right. We have to be willing to look past those preconceived notions.
Exactly. Look at the evidence objectively.
No matter how uncomfortable it might be.
Exactly.
Because ignoring it, assuming it doesn't exist, that puts people at risk.
It does. It really does.
It's been a really thought-provoking deep dive. We've explored the dark side of female psychopathy, talked about the myths surrounding these women and the crimes they commit. And I think the thing that I'm going to take away from this is just never underestimate the power of perception, both in how we view the world and how other people can use that perception to manipulate us. Thanks for joining us.